Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good afternoon. It is that special time of the conference last session. I know people are thinking about flights to catch and places that they need to go. So I'm going to try to be as pithy as I can, and that's not something I'm very good at. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to be pithy and short and sharp. And so my task really is, in some ways, is to reflect back on two incredibly rich days of conversations and presentations. We've had a dizzying array of perspectives. To call it prismatic would be understating it. On this broader question of Muslim futures and the current situation, political, technological, spiritual, theological, ideological, that we find ourselves in. And so I hope over the next sort of 17 slides, I'm able to sort of capture and reflect back some of the energy and learning in the room, and then also suggest, based on conversations that Peter and I and others have been having, not only over the last few months, but over the last sort of decade plus, some places where I think this conversation could go in a way that is generative, that meets our interests in this room as researchers, as academics and scholars, and that also continues to connect our work, as many of you have in the room, to what is happening in communities and in societies that are fast changing. I want you to look at these two images, the two at the top. I went into Gemini and I just put, Gemini, when you think of Muslim futures, give me two images of what you think of when you think of Muslim futures. That's what it generated. They're luminous, frictionless. The light is good. Nobody is bleeding. There are no drone attacks. What's missing isn't detail. We got plenty of detail. It looks like the Khalij on speed, or the Khalij in this kind of, a Jannati form that some in that region would have it. But these are futures that have no memory, no wound, no gravity, and no one actually lives there. And yet this is the generative AI's aspirational vision, or a generative AI's aspirational vision or understanding of what a Muslim future is. And then, of course, we also have a sense of what a Muslim present is, because we're witness to the catastrophes in Gaza, in Sudan, in Lebanon, in Iran, and elsewhere. So for so many years, those of us who were engaged in thinking about Muslim futures imagined what utopias and dystopias looked like, and now we're actually living them in a way with such alacrity and with such force that it almost feels like those previous ideas of utopia and dystopia have almost been completely eviscerated. And we're now replaced with a different kind of reality, right? And yet we're still stuck, as many of you have observed over the last 2 days, between these binaries of what is generated from within ourselves and our communities of culture, art, intellect, theology, academia, etc., and ideas that are imposed on us of what the kind of future that we should have or we should be engaged in. And so when we thought about this idea of Muslim futures, I kept coming back to this old phrase that the Hakawat, the storytellers in Damascus, would use before starting the story. Kan wa ma kan, it was and it was not. Of course, this is almost a universal beginning of a story, isn't it? It's the beginning of Star Wars, as much as it is the beginning of the Brothers Grimm or of the 1001 Nights. It was and it was not. It's in the space between it was and it was not, the kun fayakun, so to speak, that stuff happens. And if the Hakawati, the coffeehouse storytellers of Baghdad or Cairo or Damascus, understood that it is in that fracture, in that gap, that stories emerge, I think it's worth for us to go back into that generative space between being and not being, between what has come and what is possible. Because when we think about the Muslim futures, we are really thinking about the Muslim present, because this is where the future is being manufactured, and this is where the future is finding substance. That's why the presentations that you have offered us have been so fascinating and interesting, whether it's been looking at the Sharia compliance of fintech or the digital, the way in which the digital space is used by the Inayati Tariqa, or the AI generations of Jahannam and Jannah. These are all imaginations, but they're so happening in the present. Of course, as all of you have pointed out, and I really, Galera, thank you so much for reminding us in the last session, we know, of course, that generative space, the space of generating the future, of course, has a deep lineage. Whether that is Jazari's sort of imaginings of robotics and machines that move through the world, whether it's the storytellers of the Ottoman cafes where stories are not only being told, but musics are being invented and sharing is happening, and new ways of being and seeing the world are happening over this amazing, blessed thing called coffee. Or if it's the first identifiable feminist utopia in world literature, the work of Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain Begum, the Bengali writer who wrote Sultana's Dream. And Sultana's Dream, as many of you know, was a novel that imagined the world in the hands of female leaders and leadership. And what was the world that emerged from that? This was in the Bengal in 1905. We, and I now speak tribally, Muslims, are no strangers to imagining worlds. I would say that our very sacred text is an imaginary landscape of worlds that are to come and that we believe in, to the point of them being real already. And so in this kind of generative space, and in this discussion of Muslim futures, many of us approach this knowing that we are no strangers to the work of futurism, of generating the possibilities of what can be. And is there anything there's nothing more prophetic than this, right? To imagine the world as we hoped it would be between the now and the then. And so one of the things that I find that often is missing in our discourse, and I have to say has been largely missing from our discourse over the last 2 days, and I think we're collectively responsible for this. This is not a blame, but rather an acceptance of responsibility, is that being here in this country we call the United States, in these lands that we've referred to as America, we are often remiss by not recognizing that there is a deep tradition which is actually at the very heart of almost all of our, I would say, indigenous cultural production. And that, of course, is the experience of colonization, of indigenous erasure, of enslavement, of the coming of millions and millions of people from the continent of Africa, trafficked, enslaved in chains to the United States, and the profound impact that has on every aspect of our culture and every patch of ground that we build our universities on. Right? And so I think to myself, well, what about the movements that emerge from the Black American, the African American experience, and how do they speak to this question of futures? There's a lot been written, as Peter and I have discussed often, about Black futurism and Black futures. There's a lot written now about African futures. But I want to find that intersection between that tradition and the worlds that we are looking at when we look at Muslim futures. And in that way, I think about Malcolm X. That's an interesting picture because I also generated that on AI in preparation for a conference that we did last week. Actually, an annual lecture at Yale. We have an annual lecture called the Imam Hussein lecture on social justice, and we feature thought leaders from within the Shia tradition, particularly from the academy, particularly women. And over the last 5 years, we've had 5 sort of incredible presentations and speakers, and it's a very generative space on campus where undergraduates and graduates and faculty and staff really engage with this, not only with the contemporary Shia tradition, but with this question of social justice. And so this year's lecture, delivered by our mutual friend Fatima Siwaju, Dr. Fatima Siwaju, assistant professor at University of Virginia, was called The Cosmopolitics of Malcolm X. And so she was discussing the ways in which Malcolm X, as an iconic figure and someone whose ideas and very personality and iconography have now been overlaid with the story of Karbala and Imam Hussein, the martyrdom, and how that has influenced an understanding of universe and identity. And so you'll see sort of elements of Shi'i objects and iconography and images around Malcolm, because I put in a fairly dense sort of prop into Gemini. And said, these are the things I'm thinking about when I think about Malcolm X. Please draw me an image. And I actually thought the image wasn't bad. It took a lot of tweaking. We had to do things. Some strange things happened initially. But I put that up there because I think it does, from where I stand, does represent a deeply important part of this question of Muslim futures. This Black Atlantic thread, this thread of the African-American experience writ large and its intersection with Islam. And when I think about that, I think about music, and I think about jazz in particular. And I'm as some of you may know, I'm obsessive about the intersections between Islam and jazz. I'm a collector of Muslim vinyl. This is the stuff that keeps me up very late into the night with great excitement. But we couldn't talk about Black or Muslim futures without having the noble Sun Ra grace this conference, because Sun Ra, as a musician, as more than a musician, as a world builder, right, who acted in the world as if he was not from this world, but was from a divine cosmic black realm, and he had come to give the truth to humanity, in some ways represents the vast speculative thinking and practice. Because for folks like Sun Ra, this wasn't just a science fiction story. He was living it through music. And his music becomes one of the most important musics in the American canon and American tradition. And Sun Ra's ideas are deeply, deeply connected to Islam and the intersection between Blackness and Islam in the Americas. One of his most famous collaborations was with the Heliopolis Jazz Ensemble of Cairo, and some of their great music. Sun Ra traveled to Cairo, traveled to Egypt to play with Egyptian jazz and to imagine worlds with them in the shadow of the pyramids. One of the great tracks that was produced from that collaboration was a track that I listen to every Ramadan, which is called Ramadan Beyond Time and Space. I highly encourage you to listen to it. It's absolutely beautiful and remarkable and ethereal, and it carries you to amazing places. Ellen McCartney's recently published work, I highly recommend you looking at, examines the Black arts movement, arguably one of the most important artistic and cultural movements in the entire history of this place that we call the Americas. And Ellen McCartney deeply ties the very genesis of the Black arts movement to Islam and Muslims. In fact, the Black arts movement emerges in Harlem after the death of Malcolm X, as a response to the death of Malcolm X, by a poet who goes by the name of Amiri Baraka, by a poet, Sonia Sanchez, who becomes a member of the Nation of Islam. Is carried forward by poets and groups like the Last Poets who gather in Marcus Garvey Park and start to spit rhymes, and almost all of them are Muslim. Powerful cultural forces. And of course, to go back to the language of Jeff Chang, political change is not possible without cultural change. Cultural change must also precede political change. And if I may say to us in the academy, cultural change precedes scholarly change. Our discourse does not change until the culture changes. And so part of me now thinks about dystopia. It now thinks about the dystopias that we are living. This is the work of my beloved friend Malik Matar, artist from Gaza, who at the age of 14 began to draw her pain and the catastrophe that was happening in previous Gaza wars, ended up being in the United Kingdom studying art when the genocide began post-October 7th. Her work has been a testimony, right, to not only resilience, but to pain. The piece of work that she worked on before this was almost like a Gazan Guernica, a large-scale piece, which was about the devastation and the breaking of hearts. This is her latest piece, which is entitled "The Phoenix Rise." And here again, we see a Muslim future, a Gazan future, a Palestinian future emerging between the pain and these images of catastrophe, and also this sense of hope and a phoenix rising in spite of all this. Palestine in particular becomes for us today the canvas on which we are compelled to, required to have the discussion about Muslim futures, as many of you in your presentations have placed front and center, as you in your scholarship have placed front and center. I think about the Gaza Poets Society project, which has encouraged poets from Gaza to imagine a Gaza 20 years from now. What poems do they want the Gazan people, Palestinians, to read 20 years from now? This is the creation of a future. This amazing poem by Muhammad Musa, how can we return from tomorrow in the same clothes? How can we make bread from the camp sun? And how can we build a home from hay if the wind will blow it away? Enemies come from everywhere, from the borders they made, from the graves they built, and from the land they stole. But we never return from anywhere, from the history we wrote, from the exile we raised, and from the ruins we inhabit. There's an incredible sense of presence in these poems that without a fully embracing of the moment that we're in, there is indeed no future. When Muhammad Musa writes from the ruins that we inhabit, that's not a metaphor. That's an address. Ruin has an address and a postal code. And then we wonder to ourselves that in this pregnant moment, where you have these words that are emerging to describe this moment and set the stage for what comes next, to what extent is that moment being heard? Because as we were talking about, how is the AI being trained? Is it being trained to erase us, subvert us, circumvent us? You know, this has been a time, and many of us have talked about it over the last 2.5 years in particular. This is a millenarian time. People are talking about the last days, the coming of the Imam Mahdi, the great battle that will lead us to the AI-generated film of Jahannam that Gunter with such alacrity explained to us. But the reality, I think, is that for so many people, the apocalypse isn't coming, it's already arrived. How do we build a Muslim future from an experience of apocalypse? I put this up because this is something that in my own sort of musings and meanderings, I had missed until very recently. How many of you are familiar with the Gaza Phoenix project? I appreciate that, Peter, because I was not. And yet it, to me, feels like the response to the other rebuilding projects. It is an attempt by Palestinian civil society artists, activists, scholars, religious leaders, Christian and Muslim, city builders, urban planners, architects, children, teachers, mothers, fathers, to gather together to imagine that very phoenix that Malik Matar painted for us a few slides ago. Then what does it look like to have a participatory process of reimagining the future of a place whose present has been decimated? How do we see a future beyond apocalypse? And to me, that is fascinating. Speaking with my friend and brother Rami last night about architecture and urban planning and the power of imagination and working with partners, the fact is that our scholarship meets the work of those who imagine a world differently, who are able to work and facilitate. Something about this gives me hope. Something about this gives me a sense of what might be possible if the ways in which we are engaging, interacting with each other are based on a methodology that is rooted in profound collaboration and respect for the land and those who call the land home, and those who have died on the land, and those who continue to live on it despite despite everything that stands in their way. This again is between the way it was and the way it could be, isn't it? This is the seam, this is the fracture in which we begin to build. Iman Abdul-Hadi and her collaborator, Emmy O'Brien, in 2022 published a remarkable book called Everything for Everyone. The novel is set in, it's a novel, but it doesn't read like a novel. As scholars, as ethnographers and anthropologists in the room, you'll open up this book and you'll be slightly confused because it reads like a very rich ethnography. Iman Abdul-Hadi and Emmy O'Brien have written for us an imagined ethnography of what happened after 2052, because in 2052, the United States as a society and civilization began to collapse. Institutions of government, public safety and security, the carceral system began to crumble. Abdul-Hadi imagines a world where people, citizens, the bodega owner, the cab driver, the grandmother teaching at the church, what happens when they begin to imagine a society? They build the communes, they build the neighborhood committees, they help one another eat, live, and go to school. Between 2052 and 2072, much like Sachs Afridi led us through a kind of an embodied experiment in imagining a world as it was unfolding with the space moss, Abdul-Hadi does the same. We read interviews with a remarkable variety of New York citizens as they construct the New York commune. And they talk about the struggles, but ultimately the success of what happens when citizens are committed to neighborhoods and to each other. This was 3 years before the election of Zohran Mamdani, who says that, a life can't imitate art. The victory of Zohran is not only about Zohran, God bless him. It's about the team of people, largely young people, motivated, inspired, committed to civic and political life, who over the last 10 years planned, organized to make this happen. That we can now see the mayor of arguably one of the greatest and most influential cities, not only on the planet, but in all history, walk into a mosque every night of Ramadan, pray, and then go out and stand with queer folk in their desire for, and trans folk in their desire for justice, and stand with homeless folk in their desire to have a decent home, and stand with union workers, and tax the rich, and have free childcare, and commit themselves to the ending of food deserts, and go back to the mosque on Friday and to listen to the khutbah from the Bengali uncle. It's a remarkable moment. It is an absolutely remarkable moment in this time of American history, and I say that that is the future being created now. And the burden isn't on Zohran, but actually the inspiration is on the artist, on the writer, on the scholar, to imagine the world as it could be. If you haven't read Abdul-Hadi's book, order it now, read it. It's so good. It's so good. It's so much fun, and it really it just allows you to imagine the mechanics of a world being formed. The fiction sometimes leads the politics. I think about the works of Morashin Alayari, an Iranian artist whose recent work is called The Remaining Signs of Future Centuries. And what it does, it traces the neglected history of Islamic science, optics, clocks, geometric tables, celestial objects, alchemical tools, through an anti-colonial feminist and queer lens. How do we take these historic artifacts that exist within museums, and how do we start to give them meaning in a future that we want to see? Her work is so fascinating because it is through photography and film imagining what these objects not only mean, but the impact they have in a totally different circumstance than the circumstance that they were invented in. That is the kind of creativity that I think the discussion on Muslim futures calls us to. And it is those ideas of the possible that I think for us who are observers and hopefully participators in this project, it is something that's vitally important for us to embrace. Because I would suggest to you that this path is not merely a path of world building or fiction making, but actually in doing this work emerges a particular epistemology. How is knowledge created? And how are we creating the possibilities of new knowledges, if not through the power of imagination? And so as I wrap up, I want to turn to the works of Larissa Sansur. Many of you will be familiar with this Palestinian writer and filmmaker and artist. Many of you will remember her 2012 work, which is called Nation Estate. It imagined Palestine as a vertical skyscraper, each floor a city, Haifa, and Nablus, and Khalil, and Ramallah, and Gaza City, and Khan Yunis, and Jerusalem. It was like the flag on the building was above the clouds. The dome of the rock was reconstructed and visible only through a constructed passage. Because Palestine was closed off, and yet Palestine, the building was there. So you could see the dome of the rock, but not visit it. It was a remarkable thought experiment. How do you reimagine a nation in a place where a nation may not be able to exist? It was a powerful exhibit. For those of you who might have seen it, it was in London and elsewhere. It was a powerful, powerful exhibit. In 2019, her film In Vitro imagined two Palestinian women in a bunker after the ecological collapse of the planet, debating whether memory could be transmitted to those born underground who had never seen Palestine. How do you communicate this thing called Palestine and Palestinian identity when you will never be able to see it, never be able to touch it, never be able to feel it, never be able to cook it, because the whole world has been gone to hell? Is it possible to pass on memory and identity? And the implication is they're in vitro now, right? It's a new birth. What does it mean to be Palestinian by extension? What does it mean to be Muslim? What does it mean to be human? And her most recent work is called From the Remains of What We Lost. She's looking at not the living in the land, but the things that remain. The stuff the detritus after the apocalypse. The architecture that is now mangled. The archive. What is the archive of the apocalypse? It's a fascinating and important question. Can you build a future from that archive? How do you bring the archive alive? What is an archive? What survives when everything is taken? Sansur helps us imagine and ask these very present questions. And my contention is, without the resolution of these questions, I know you'll agree with me, we can't imagine the future. There's no futures without reckoning with that reality. And then, of course, we've already heard from the amazing Layla Sakhar, drawn to her work and drawn to the images that her work has created. And I think we had just begun really to scratch the surface of the depth of her scholarship and the way in which she makes her scholarship living in algorithm. So I'm not going to say a lot about it other than play with Arsheet. Play with it. See what happens. Throw in some data sets. See what comes up in that generative space that she offered us. And then finally, my friends, where in some ways, Peter will know this, where our conversations began almost 10 years ago, was the fact that we are living through an incredible moment of literary production about the future. Speculative fiction, fantasy, imagining new worlds. We are spoiled for choice right now. I spent a lot of time in Indonesia and Singapore, and so I come across works like Nazmi Bahrawi's edited volume, Singapura Pura, which is Malay science fiction writing, imagining Nusantara, imagining the archipelago, imagining Malayu through the lens of science fiction. If you go to Africa, you'll find the works of Dilman Dilla, Muslim writer from Uganda, who is imagining a technology meeting the reality of Africa and imagining, well, what does that look like? And then, of course, we have work that is coming to us from the Arab world, Frankenstein in Baghdad. Many of you will be familiar with Ahmed Sadawi's amazing work, imagining what it means to build the Iraqi citizen when the Iraqi body has been obliterated. And literally, he imagines the Frankenstein. The main character in the book is grabbing a Shia arm, a Sunni hand, right? A Kurdish leg, a Yazidi head. What does the citizen of this Iraq look like? Who is this Frankenstein of Baghdad? How does that help us understand the future of citizenship and identity and land and borders and? The novel allows us to do that in a way that's amazing and beautiful. And I could go on. I think about, and some of you are familiar with Stephen Barnes's set of novels where he imagines what would have happened if Africans had been in the slave trade business and we had enslaved all of Europe. What would Africa and the world look like? It's an amazing thought experiment. There's 2 novels as part of this series, worth reading, compelling, intriguing, interesting. Barnes explores ethical, moral questions that we know we often apply this white supremacy, but he applies it to the African Black experience. How does that change? And because it's a particularly Muslim framing, it is Muslim leadership of Africa, martial, confident, organized, intellectually superior than Europe. I wish I'd read that when I was 12 years old. It gives a different vision of the world. Disturbing? Sure. Compelling? Yeah, that too. Barnes's novels were an early attempt at this new world building. Shannon Chakraborty's amazing new trilogy after her Cities trilogy, her Amina Asarafi's trilogy. I don't know how you ever read the first book, The Adventures of Amina Asarafi. A must read. You're talking about someone who's taking feminist and womanist and racialized and queer ideologies, politics, theologies, looking at what a diverse world looks like, merging that with Islamic narratives and histories and faith and spirituality. It's just such a damn good book. It's compelling. It's like you can't put it down. And her second book is just coming out very, very soon. The Tapestry of Faith. I mean, people like Chakraborty, of course, Chakraborty is one of at least I can name 24 right now, right? Of individuals who are writing speculative fiction, fantasy. Amal al-Mukhtar, for instance, a Palestinian writer, her Nebula-winning short stories are absolutely remarkable. Usman Malik, Dina Muhammad, Sophia Samata, and others. For those of you who are on Kickstarter, get on right away and order Karim Ahmed's edited volume, Muslim Futures. It comes in 2 versions, a prose version of prose stories and a graphic novel version. cutting edge writers from within the Muslim experience speaking to those futures, imagining those conversations, intergenerational. That's what you find in these novels. There's something beautiful about them. They're intergenerational. They're bringing past, present, and future together. They're easily quoting Quran and Rumi and Iqbal and hip hop all on the same pages. This is a kind of a modern syncretic literature, but clearly defined by a Muslim identity. These are Sufi and Islamic cosmologies which are being overlaid horror fiction. They're being overlaid fantasy. They're being overlaid other worlds. It's an exciting time. I have to say that it's the literary space that it really excites me. And I can honestly say there's literatures which we here in North America haven't even experienced yet. Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Africa, they're writing for themselves. That's what's exciting. They're not writing for us. They're not even writing for our American Muslim exceptional gaze. They're writing for themselves, imagining worlds for themselves on their own terms. And that's a kind of confidence that I think we need to ultimately engage with. And then there is finally, my friends, there is a little bit of Muslim futurism that is a branding exercise. And I think that's what some of us were, that discomfort, Sumaya, that you were raising earlier, the corporatization of this, who controls these narratives, who produces these games and texts. You put a hijab on a robot, you call it representation, you collect a grant. And we've all been there. I didn't get the grant. We saw other people get it, right? We should be suspicious of that. The demand is to produce a legible, the marketable, optimistic future, which is made of people living inside it well, resilient against catastrophe, a future without violence, of course, because that's what everyone wants. That's not what we're talking about in this space. You're scholars. You're critical and realistic. You know that the founding document, if there was one of this space, this is a site of not only critical analysis, this is a site of resisting that kind of cheap flattening of our experience. When you speak about the way Muslim communities are engaging with AI, you're complicating for us a story that people want to make. Sometimes I think the most radical thing for us to do is refuse. And in fact, in this post-Gaza period, there has been a number of movements of particularly Palestinian and Arab artists who are like, we're refusing to participate. You bomb us, you genocide us, you destroy us. And then we have to have the burden of not only resistance, resilience, but then we have to hold the burden in your museum spaces for representing ourselves and giving ourselves life. When we are trying to give ourselves life and our life is being effaced, fuck you. That's what they say. And that's what they're saying. The right of refusal. To say, nope, we're not doing it on your terms, we're not doing it in your spaces, we're not doing it in your academies. We are not going to bear your burdens. When we're going to do it for our people. We're going to do it for the next generation and the generation after that, because we've got to do it, otherwise we will not survive. So there is a powerful right of refusal. This is the work of Tanya Al-Khoury. It was a beautiful, I read about it. It's called As Far As My Fingertips Take Me. She worked with a refugee artist, and individuals would come into the gallery and would hear narratives of journey. And they would put their arm through a hole. They would never see the artist. And out would come these drawings, these stories that were told on their bodies as a way of communicating beyond language, an embodied form of storytelling that you carried off with you. That was it. Why was that the right of refusal? It's like, we're not getting into a conversation. We're not going to have a conversation about my refugee experience. We're not going to have a conversation about how I've been so resilient. We're not going to have a conversation about my brother who perished right in front of me on the crossing over the Mediterranean. But I'm going to give you something. I am, because we're generous people. I'm going to give you something in my story. I was so moved by this because it almost felt like this was a resistance that was couched in ritual and not words. And also it was just a way of saying, let us share stories on their own terms, and let's just all go out and do the work. And therefore, where does all of this lead us? All of the incredible presentations that we've heard, all of your scholarship, and all of this thinking that our minds are buzzing with. How do we get to that place, kan wa maka? It was and it was not. How do we find the poignant emergent place in that mind? I think this conference is incredible. To Sumaya, to Peter, to Aisha Noor, and the rest of the team, what a remarkable gathering. I think those of us who are here feel incredibly blessed and honored to be here. We're leaving, bursting with ideas and next steps about the possibilities. But if we're going to be true to our study here, then we have to be constantly creating the space between kan wa baka, commissions, deep dive into the archives, festivals of literature and film. One of my great dreams is a festival of Muslim science fiction and fantasy, with scholars like yourselves and artists, deep engagement about the theology, ideology, political philosophies, world building that these authors are doing. It'll be more than academics in this room. It'll be young people in this room. It'll be people who love stories and ideas, sitting around, having gahwa, talking about Amina Sarafi and talking about Ruqayya Begum and the world run by women, and people weighing in. That's exciting to me. And that's the kind of stuff that then the Ramis of the world who are building cities, working with people, they take and they do amazing things. Where's our cultural square? There's no Muslim future without a cultural square. Who's facilitating that cultural square in a time when museums are shrinking, in the time when the academy is under attack, at a time when our own philanthropic institutions are myopic? It's moments like this that we have to kind of flex a little bit. And finally, as scholars, I would say that our mission is, how do we create the knowledge infrastructure for the imagination? The research you're doing on AI, the research you're doing on fintech, the research you're taking on in terms of looking at the emergence of feminist ways of being and knowing in the world. For me, I consider that knowledge infrastructure. That's how do we create that in a way that those who are engaged in the work find our research and they don't have to look for it, like, we know where to come. This is where it's happening. This is the cool stuff. Now we take that data and we run with it. And there's a feedback loop. My challenge to us is that, are we in the academy as researchers willing, wanting, able to create the knowledge infrastructure for the imagination? That's not a one-year project, a two-year project. It's a way that we change our institutions to make them far more relevant in a time of apocalypse, a time of climate collapse. I don't know how many of you read the Guardian article yesterday on the collapse of the Atlantic current. It was the most frightening thing I've read since the genocide in Gaza and Sudan. Before the end of the century, they're saying that if the current collapses, there's a possibility of sea rise of 100 centimeters. It means that most of the east and west coast are wiped out in the United States. That means the erasure of hundreds of millions of human beings. There's nothing stopping it because human beings have wrought all this catastrophe. We're living in a really uneasy time. I don't know how you guys feel. I get up in the morning, most morning, I'm just uneasy. I mean, I need that first cup of coffee, right? to ease it out. And a little bit of, McCoy Tyner, the vinyl. And maybe I'm a little bit ready, but it's very uneasy. what is our contribution in this moment? And I think this is, I feel like something here is our contribution. This is our contribution. A digital maqam of survival. This is the Hagawati's rule. We're all storytellers in our own way. And my hope is that we're not merely predicting the future, we're generating. How do we move from predictors to generators? I think we can. And so I'll leave you with this amazing image. I wish I had audio, because I'd play for you the amazing George Clinton and the Mothership Connection. I love this. This is a great album. Please listen to it. George Clinton, great American musician, from the Motown tradition. Clinton, he's not using this image loosely. Clinton, this is the 1970s. This is after the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam are science fiction writers. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Master Farag Muhammad, they were imagining literally the mothership, the cosmological, divine Black entity that would come to save the Black man and woman and people from the catastrophe of white supremacy. The spaceship and the mothership is spoken of often in the Nation of Islam cosmology. This isn't only a theological thing. It is, for me, a canvas on which we write that great myth of our times. And what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I believe, was telling his people, was telling the Black body in America, is that you are divine. You are cosmological. You are connected to eternity. There's going to be a time where you're going to ride spaceships to other universes. Prepare yourself for it. And so Clinton gave us the soundtrack. While we're waiting for the mothership, at least we can have the mothership connection. So I invite us in, because the Black tradition is a generous tradition. I say, as someone who is not African American, but has benefited incredibly and continues to do, hopefully with some degree of humility from that tradition, this is a tradition that embraces us. Let Clinton and the mothership connection be our anthem. The cosmological, the wild, the possible, the speculative. I think all of that is really powerful stuff. And I think we in this room, with this amazing first step that we've taken over the last few days and over the last few months in organizing and thinking about this, I think there's a lot of amazing possibilities here. And I hope we can continue to remain connected in community with each other, talking with each other, speaking, and sharing, and thinking about how we create the conditions for imagining a future in spite of the dystopia and the apocalypse that we're living through. Thank you for being so patient with me. I basically blew through my 25 minutes. So I thank you for that, and I hope that was useful. Thank you very much, everybody. We have like 5 minutes left, and I don't know what we do in 5 minutes. But not even questions. If anyone has any burning reflections, let's take just 2 or 3 at the same time. So maybe we have a sense of what's happening in the room, what's emerging for you. I think it'll give Sumaya and Peter at least a sense before they send out the requisite survey. Survey monkey. I know. I mean, I think Aisha was already on it. That's our thing, But yeah, I'd love to hear thoughts. Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, actually, I was very moved by your presentation, but at the same time, I'm very worried about the way our education system going in the United States. We are trending away from the liberal arts education. I went to a liberal arts school, back 35 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, I know this narrative is very powerful. I do not think that the new generation that we're creating, sort of number which degree can be marketable. Yeah. Do you have anything to say about this?
I'll say that you're right. It's a really weird time. And this is This is a challenging generation. Now I'm with you. But it means that our job is so much harder, but also so much more necessary. No, I'm with you. I have no objection to what you're saying. In fact, I'm on your team on this one for sure. Yeah, I feel it. It's a really challenging moment. Anyone else? We have 3.5 minutes. Right here, Salvage.
Thank you so much. This was really beyond fascinating. You gave us a lot of things to unload. I'm a teacher, so unload connection. But thank you so much. This was beyond fascinating. You gave us a lot of good food for thought. One thing that has been raised, I think, earlier was building bridges.
Mm.
And I think that at this time we need building bridges more than ever before. The whole threat of polarization and division and people living in their own bubbles, their own echo chambers, is very, very true now more than ever before. And I think that reaching out across our differences and across the different divisions, whether they are ideological, religious, philosophical, professional, you name it, I think is very important. One thing that was talked about before is building bridges